In the previous session, we wrote our JavaScript code and we were successful at getting the recipes from the Forkify API, and we also went ahead and printed all this on the console. And if you go to our console, we can see the information that you are able to get. I'll inspect and go to the console. We'll go with this. So when we search for pizza, you see we're getting all that information here. And the next step for this session is to go ahead and get this data and render it here on the page. For us to render the data on the page, we're going to create a div where we're going to render. Basically, when someone clicks on search, all the information is going to be rendered to that div on this entire region that you can see here. The first step towards that is creating that div. So we'll create that div and we'll give it an ID of recipe list. We'll also style this. We'll also style this section. So we'll give it a class of we want the data to be displayed in grid format. So we'll just say grid and grid calls 1. We're going to be seeing how all this information displays. Now we'll leave it at this. We might need to add some setting a bit later, but the next thing that we need to go ahead and do is in our JavaScript, and we need to get that div that we just created, and we'll store it in a variable called recipe list. Now we'll do document dot get element by ID, and we're getting the recipe list ID that we created. Okay, there is also this should be const. I called it class instead of const. That's why it was getting that error. Now, after getting this, the next thing that we're going to try and do is render these recipes. To render our recipes, we're going to create a function. Let's create that function here. So we fetch and then render. So we create a function and we're going to call it render recipes. It's going to take in the array of recipes that we get as an argument. And the first thing you're going to try and do is when you're rendering the recipes, because the first thing is we're going to make sure that the entire region is empty. So for that, we're going to say recipe list dot. We're going to use inner HTML and we'll just pass in empty there, so that every time every time someone wants to go and search the recipes they're going to find an empty, basically empty, no recipes rendered on that page. We'll go ahead and try to, we're also going to go and iterate through the recipes array that we've passed in here. Remember, the data that we get from this is in form of an array, and we saw that on the console. So we're going to we're going to just say recipes dot. You can use the dot mark method or the for each method to do the iteration. So in this case, I'll just use for each. So I'll say recipes dot for each, and for each recipe that we get, this is what we're going to do for each recipe. We're going to create a card for each of the recipes, and we'll store this card in a variable. I'm going to call this variable recipe card. Recipe card also up here should be fetching. The R is not supposed to be there. Then we'll create a div. So say document dot create element, and we're going to create a div. So this div is going to go inside the other div that we created earlier. The div that contains now is going to contain all of these recipes that we render. And then we're going to style this div a bit. So we'll say recipe dot class list dot add, and let's give it a background of white. So give it a background of white, and let's also give it a padding. We'll do some of the styling later. We're just doing this for now so we can get a feel of what it's going to look like. So give it a padding of maybe 6, and I need to close this here. So I'm getting that error. Okay. Then after creating the recipe card, we need to render this recipe card, or we need to add it to the we need to add it to we need to add the information into that card. So inside that card that contains each of the recipes, we need the image for that recipe. Remember, this API comes with an image as well. We need an image for that recipe, the title of that recipe, and a button. There's more information that comes with the API, and that you can extend it later. The recipe card dot inner HTML, and we're going to add some. So we're going to add some things in here. The first thing we're going to add is an image. So we'll create an img tag. This needs src, where we're going to give the source of the image, and for that we're going to do so we're going to add in the recipe comes in with an image. For that, we can go ahead and say for each recipe dot image underscore url, and if you go here, if you inspect, you can see all this information is there. So it's search for pizza again. Now if you expand this, you'll notice here there's the title. We have the title there's of course the publisher of that recipe. The recipe also has a title. Let me expand one of them. It has an image which is represented by image underscore URL. Publisher, there's a publisher URL, there's a recipe ID, there's a social rank, there's source URL, there's also the title of that. So the first thing we're getting here is the URL of that recipe. And that we get it from recipe.image URL. Remember, that is an object, that's why we're doing that. Then we'll give it an alternative text for the image. We'll make the title of the title of the recipe to be the alternative text in case the image is not there. So for that, we also say recipe dot title, and that should be it. In terms of styling, let's go ahead and we can add the styling actually later. So the next thing we're going to do here is get the head the title of the recipe. We'll do with a h2 tag. We might adjust it in case it's too big or too small. So here we're going to pass in the recipe title. So we'll say recipe dot title. Then we'll add some styling to this in a moment once we've seen how everything looks like. Then we'll also give it a button. Now for the button is for planning our meal. So we want to plan our meal. So give it a text of plan meal. In terms of styling, we'll also try and style this a bit. We'll try and style it a bit later. But the main thing that we need for when someone clicks on the button is at the ID, the recipe ID. We want when someone clicks on the button, we can fetch the recipe ID. And the reason for that is we'll go back to the browser. If you want to get the documentation, if you want to get in the details of each individual recipe, it comes with an ID here. So this is going to return the specific recipe and some other information that we need from that recipe. Now we need this ID so we can pick that recipe and add it to the favorite section or to my recipes section. That's why we're going to need that ID. And for that case, we'll go and get the ID here. So we'll say data ID. Data ID is going to be the, me just use this for consistency, and we'll say recipe.id. That goes in there. Now that we've gotten our recipe, we've added this card. After adding the card, now the entire recipe list that we've just created, we need to append this entire recipe list to our, I need to close this. We need to append it to the main div that we created, which is the recipe card. We created the recipe card here. Where is it? Here. We created the recipe card here. So we need to add we need to add this recipe card to the main recipe, which is this recipe list here. For that, we'll just say a recipe list dot append child, and we're appending the recipe card. With this, we are able to we will be able to render our recipe. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's try to see if we can render the recipe. So we want, when someone clicks on search, then when they click on the search button, we render a recipe to them. So I'll get rid of this console that we had earlier. Then in place of that, we'll try to render the recipes. So we call the render recipes function, and the argument that we're going to pass in is the recipes. Again, we're getting the recipes from here. So after calling the fetch recipes function, which gets all the data that we need. Now, fingers crossed, let's try and see whether we're going to get an output. So we'll start with pizza. We click on search. It's saying cannot read properties of undefined, reading add. Let's see that. Okay, so we're trying to get the it's this here. So we're adding recipe instead. This we're adding these classes, the recipe card. So just me who needs to update this to be recipe card. So recipe card dot class list. Now it should work. Let's try again. Pizza, search. Awesome. Now as you can see, we're getting all our recipes. There's the image there. We're getting the title, and there's this button. Again, we need to sell this button so that we can get everything ordered. Awesome. So we'll add a few styles real quick to see. Everything checks out really well. Let's style this individual cards first, and we can, for the image. So we gave it a padding. We gave the image a padding, a padding of no, this is not the image. This is the card. So for the card, we gave it a background of white, padding of 6, because it's still a card. So let's also make it rounded. Then we'll give it a shadow. So shadow, and we also give it an overflow of hidden. We'll just say overflow hidden. Hit save, go back to the page. Okay, it will need me to search again. Okay, so the card needs a bit more styling for all the other changes to reflect. Let's go to the image. So the image is here. We need to sell the image as well. Give it a class. I'll just use single quotes for consistency as I did earlier. I will give it a width of full for the image, so it covers the entire card basically. Then give it a height, and let's say object cover, and margin bottom of 4. So there's some spacing between the image and and everything else. Again, let me just finish writing the styles here. Then after that, we'll go ahead and check everything. Also, this heading, you'll need some styles. I'll do this just quickly. So the text size, let's make it 2XL. Give it a font of bold. because it's the title, and let's give it a margin bottom of 2, so there's a bit of separation there as well. And for the button, we also need to style the button. We'll also give the button a class and give it a background of green 500. Make the text white, give it a padding of 2. Let's make this button rounded. Again, it's a button, so it makes sense to make it that, and then let's give it a margin top of 2. So this is going to make sure there's really good separation, including even the 2. So you give the heading also a margin bottom of 2. If you go here, let's try to search again, pizza. Awesome. So as you can see, the cards are filling the entire width here. We still need to add some styling for it to fill in well. See, the button is here, planner meal, is all this. Now the other thing that we need to go ahead and style is the main container, in HTML, where all this information is going into, and that container is here. So we gave it we made we want the information to be displayed in grid. So I'll just quickly add some other styles here. So grid calls to in the margin bottom of 6. Let's go and see that. Now let's search pizza. The entry search. Awesome. Now the cards look a bit better. Again, there's more that could be done to this to make it a bit more presentable, but we'll work with this for now. So this is what our cards look like. This is what our button looks like, and yeah. So this is what we've been able to do in this session. We were able to fetch the data. What we've done in this session is basically render that information here, and we've done that by doing a few things. So we created this div for render, of course, the container for adding those recipes there. We also created this the render recipes function, whose function is mainly to render that recipe that we've created. So that is it for now, and I'll see you on the next one.